Imagine a memory so ancient, so deeply embedded in the marrow of your bones, that it predates your very existence. It is a persistent, quiet ache, a profound nostalgia for a home you have never actually visited. We spend our entire lives trying to recreate it. We build walled gardens, we seek out pristine beaches, we design gated communities, and we buy houseplants to put in our concrete apartments. We are constantly, desperately trying to get back to a place that human history tells us we lost. The story of the Garden of Eden does not begin as a whimsical fairy tale or a dusty myth to be filed away alongside Greek gods and Babylonian monsters. To understand it the way the ancient mind understood it, we have to step off the concrete of the modern world and place our bare feet onto the soil of humanity's original sanctuary. We have to strip away the Sunday school illustrations of a generic, lush forest with a couple of people eating apples. That is not what this was. Eden was the primordial stage of human existence. It was a meticulously designed temple. It was the absolute epicenter of reality, where the physical world and the spiritual realm were completely indistinguishable. There was no veil. There was no separation. To touch the bark of a tree was to touch the intention of the Creator. To breathe the air was to inhale the divine breath. We find ourselves anchored in the ancient Near East, somewhere around the dawn of recorded human civilization, roughly 4,000 years before the Common Era. To grasp the sheer magnitude of the garden, we must first understand the terrifying reality of the world outside of it. The ancient Mesopotamian landscape was not a forgiving place. It was a realm of untamed, chaotic wilderness. It was a brutal expanse of scorching deserts, unpredictable, violent floods, and predatory beasts. Survival in the ancient Near East was a daily, grueling war against the elements. But then there was Eden. The word itself in ancient Hebrew suggests luxury, delight, and profound pleasure. Later traditions would use the Persian loanword pardes, from which we get our word paradise. A pardes was a walled enclosure, a royal park, a cultivated garden protected from the chaos of the wild. This is the first profound contrast we must understand. Eden was not the entire world. It was a specific, bordered sanctuary carved out of the untamed earth. It was a pocket of absolute perfection, a royal enclosure where the chaos of the outside world was not permitted to enter. We look at the ground beneath our feet. In the ancient Judean home, the foundation was either hard stone or packed, swept dirt. But the soil of Eden was something entirely different. It was the pristine, uncorrupted dust of the earth. In Hebrew, the word for earth or soil is Adama. And from this Adama, the Creator formed the man, Adam. The linguistic connection is impossible to ignore. Humanity was not dropped into this garden from an alien world. Humanity was an organic extension of the garden itself. You were dirt that had been given breath. In the world we know today, the soil is something we often pave over or wash off our hands. We consider it dirty. We consider it common. But in this original sanctuary, the soil was the very medium of miracles. It was the canvas of creation. This ground yielded its abundance effortlessly. There was no need for the back-breaking, sweat-inducing toil that would later define human agriculture. The earth eagerly offered up its life. It is a stark, heartbreaking contrast to the cursed, thorn-yielding ground that would later plague human existence. where every calorie consumed had to be wrestled from an unforgiving dirt. If we look up, we do not see the flat mud brick roofs that would later characterize the houses of Judea. Those roofs were built to capture rain, to provide a place to dry flax, to offer a cool place to sleep during the sweltering summers. They were human attempts to manage an unpredictable environment. In Eden, the canopy was entirely divine. The architecture of the sky and the atmospheric conditions were perfectly calibrated. The ancient texts tell us a fascinating, often overlooked detail about the climate of this original home. There was no rain as we understand it. No violent storms, no torrential downpours that could wash away topsoil or threaten life. Instead, a mysterious mist rose continually from the earth, watering the entire face of the ground. It was a perfect self-sustaining system of irrigation. The atmosphere was a gentle, nurturing embrace. The canopy of ancient, towering trees provided a living roof, filtering the light, while the mist from the ground ensured that nothing ever withered, nothing ever went thirsty. It was an environment that required no anxiety about tomorrow's weather. And speaking of thirst, we must move from the macro geography of this region to the intimate, life-giving details of its layout. In the harsh reality of the ancient Middle East, water was the ultimate currency. Wars were fought over wells. Daily life revolved around the grueling task of walking to the local spring, lowering a heavy clay jar, and hauling water back to the courtyard. It was a relentless chore. But Eden was defined by its water. It was the source of it. A massive river flowed out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it divided and became 4 great rivers: the Pishon, the Gihon, the Tigris, and the Euphrates. These were not just geographical markers. They were the very arteries of life for the known world. The sheer volume of water represented an overwhelming, staggering abundance. In a part of the world where a single trickling spring was considered a miracle, Eden sat upon the headwaters of global civilization. The water flowed out freely, a symbol of divine provision pouring out from the sacred center into the wider, chaotic world. Within this perfectly irrigated, perfectly sheltered environment, we find the inhabitants. And here we encounter a reality that is almost impossible for our modern minds to fully grasp: the original harmony between humanity and wildlife. In the ancient Judean home, it was common for a family to share their single-room house with their most valuable livestock. The animals provided heat during the cold winter nights, and keeping them inside protected them from thieves and predators. It was a coexistence born out of necessity and survival. But the ecosystem of Eden was an entirely different kind of shared space. It was a world entirely devoid of fear. There was no predator and no prey. There was no instinct to flee, no need to hide. Imagine standing in a clearing and watching a massive predator, a lion or a bear, approach, and feeling absolutely no spike of adrenaline, no terror. Imagine an environment where the concept of violence simply did not exist. It is within this perfect harmony that we witness one of the most profound events of human history: Adam naming the animals. We often treat this like a whimsical children's fable, a fun afternoon activity where a man points at a creature and arbitrarily calls it an elephant or a giraffe. But to the ancient mind, a name was not merely a label. A name contained the very essence, the character, and the destiny of the thing being named. When Adam observed the animals and gave them their names, it was the very first act of scientific observation. It was the first act of poetry. It was a demonstration of profound, empathetic intelligence. He was studying the intricate designs of the Creator, understanding the nature of each creature, and articulating its purpose. It was the ultimate exercise of divine stewardship. Humanity was not placed in the garden to be a passive consumer. Humanity was placed there to be the intelligent, articulate voice of the physical world. As we move toward the center of this magnificent layout, we find the ultimate source of sustenance and the ultimate focal point of human choice. At the heart of the garden stood two specific trees, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. In the centuries that followed, the kitchen and the courtyard would become the center of domestic life. Food preparation would become a complex ritual involving stone jars for purification, precise laws regarding what could and could not be eaten, and the constant underlying fear of contamination. The Jewish table would become a sacred space, a place of communion, but one heavily guarded by boundaries and rules. In Eden, food was a pure, unadulterated gift of divine communion. There was no need for stone water jars to purify one's hands, because nothing was impure. There was no need for complex dietary restrictions, because everything that was offered was good. The tree of life stood as a constant, freely available source of immortality and vitality. To eat from it was to participate in the endless, overflowing life of the Creator. It was the central hearth of humanity's first home. But right beside it stood the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This was the boundary line. It was the single restriction in an otherwise limitless world. Why place it there? Because love, communion, and relationship cannot exist without a choice. If humanity was forced to obey, they would be nothing more than biological robots in a gilded cage. The presence of that tree dignified humanity with the terrifying weight of free will. It was the architectural focal point where trust was tested daily. To walk past it and not eat was an active, daily declaration of trust in the goodness of the Creator. Let us consider how this sanctuary was illuminated. In the homes of the ancient world, when the sun went down, the darkness was absolute. It was a terrifying, suffocating dark that brought cold and the threat of predators. The only defense was the faint, flickering light of small clay oil lamps. Families would gather around these tiny flames, nursing the expensive olive oil, relying on them for safety and a sense of belonging. The doorposts of these homes would later bear the mezuzah, a small parchment containing the Word of God, marking the threshold, declaring who belonged inside. But in the original sanctuary of Eden, the illumination was of a completely different order. Before the need for pressed olive oil, before the need for a physical scroll on a doorpost, the guiding light of the garden was the unfiltered presence of the Creator Himself. The light wasn't just physical photons bouncing off leaves. It was the illuminating reality of truth. There were no shadows of deception, no dark corners where fear could hide. The mark of belonging wasn't nailed to a wooden frame. It was stamped into the very image and likeness of the inhabitants. You did not need a lamp to see in the dark, because the darkness held no terror. As the rhythm of life in this garden unfolds, the narrative slows down to contemplate the ultimate ritual of this era. It is a moment described in the ancient texts with breathtaking intimacy. The Creator walking in the garden in the cool of the day. This was the original Sabbath. Long before the complex preparations of the Judean Friday afternoon, long before the lighting of the Sabbath candles and the breaking of the challah bread, there was this simple, profound rhythm. The cool of the day refers to the evening breeze, this specific time when the heat of the Middle Eastern sun finally breaks and a gentle wind sweeps through the trees. In Hebrew, the word for wind, breath, and spirit is the exact same word, ruach. When the ruach blew through the garden in the evening, it was the time for side-by-side communion. It was the time when the infinite Creator condescended to walk the dirt paths with His finite creation. Imagine the psychological safety of that moment. There was no need for sacrifices. There was no need for an altar or a priest or a mediator. There was no anxiety about whether you had performed the rituals correctly. There was only the sound of footsteps in the garden and the absolute certainty that you were loved, known, and entirely welcome in the presence of the divine. This brings us to the architectural blueprint that Eden established for all of human history. We mentioned earlier that Eden was a bordered sanctuary. It was carved out of the wider earth. This concept is crucial. When we look at the later, elite houses of ancient Jerusalem, the homes of the high priests with their private ritual baths and their gated courtyards, we see an echo of a much older design. Eden was the prototype of the temple. Just as the later tabernacle and the temple in Jerusalem would have three distinct zones: the outer courtyard, the holy place, and the Holy of Holies. The ancient geography reflected this same pattern. There was the untamed world outside. There was the region of Eden. And then, planted within that region, was the garden itself. The garden was the original Holy of Holies. It was the exact center of the world, the place where heaven and earth overlapped completely. And within this Holy of Holies, the first education took place. In the Judean home, the household was the first synagogue. It was where the father taught the children the Torah, where the values of hospitality and memory were instilled. In Eden, the education came in the form of a cultural mandate. Humanity was told to work and keep the garden. We often make the mistake of thinking that work is a result of a curse. We associate labor with exhaustion, frustration, and Mondays we dread. But in the original sanctuary, work was a divine assignment. The Hebrew words used for work and keep are the exact same words used later in the biblical text to describe the duties of the priests serving in the temple. Adam and Eve were not just gardeners. They were the high priests of the cosmic temple. Their labor was an act of worship, to cultivate the plants, to organize the ecosystem, to expand the borders of the garden out into the untamed world. This was a joyful expression of human purpose. Work was supposed to be the thrilling application of human creativity to the canvas of the natural world. It was a partnership with the divine. But then, the atmosphere of our story shifts drastically. The rhythm breaks. The harmony shatters. We must recount the profound tragedy of the fall. It is a moment that changes the trajectory of the universe. The choice is made. The boundary is crossed. The fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is consumed. And the immediate result is not a sudden influx of divine wisdom, but a crushing, suffocating wave of a completely new emotion: shame. Up until this moment, vulnerability was safe. The ancient texts note that they were naked and felt no shame. They were completely exposed to each other and to God, and there was nothing to hide because there was no flaw to conceal. But the moment the trust is broken, the ecosystem of the human mind fractures. Suddenly, the gaze of the other is no longer safe. It is judgmental. It is dangerous. The immediate, instinctual reaction is to cover up, to hide. They frantically sew fig leaves together. It is the very first act of human religion, a desperate, inadequate attempt to cover our own flaws, to manage our own image, to hide our brokenness from the world. When the evening breeze comes, when the cool of the day arrives, the sound of the footsteps in the garden no longer brings joy. It brings sheer, unadulterated terror. The humans hide among the trees of the garden. The very sanctuary that was designed for their pleasure has become a place to conceal their guilt. This is where the reality of mortality violently enters the domestic space. In the later centuries of Judean life, the preparation of bodies for burial would become a deeply ingrained part of the domestic routine. Women would wash the bodies of their loved ones, anointing them with spices, wrapping them in linen, in mourning the harsh reality of death. Eden witnesses the very first introduction of this mortality. The consequence of stepping away from the source of life is inevitably death. But the physical death of the humans is delayed by an act of profound, heartbreaking grace that requires the first shedding of blood in the history of the world. The fig leaves are not enough. The human attempt to cover human shame is insufficient. And so, the Creator provides garments of animal skin to cover their vulnerability. Pause and consider the sensory horror of this moment. In a world that had never known violence, a world where animals were named and known and lived in perfect harmony with humanity, an animal has to die. Blood is spilled on the pristine soil of the garden. The life of an innocent creature is taken to cover the guilt of the guilty. Adam and Eve have to feel the weight of those skins, the residual warmth of a life that was taken because of their choice. It is a visceral, traumatic introduction to the cost of rebellion. It is the first sacrifice. The story now approaches its painful climax at the gates of exile. The garden can no longer be their home. A sanctuary of absolute purity cannot tolerate the presence of corruption, lest the corruption consume the sanctuary itself. Furthermore, they cannot be allowed to eat from the tree of life, while in a broken, fallen state, immortalizing their own tragedy forever. And so the transition occurs. It is not a gentle departure. They are driven out. We visualize the eastern gate of the garden, as humanity is pushed out into the harsh, unforgiving reality of the ancient Near East. They look back, and there, blocking the entrance, are the cherubim. These are not the chubby, winged babies of Renaissance art. These are terrifying, majestic spiritual beings, the guardians of the divine throne room. And with them is a flaming sword, flashing back and forth, guarding the way to the tree of life. It is a terrifying festival of fire. In later centuries, the Israelites would celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles, lighting massive pillars of fire in the temple courtyard to remember God's presence in the wilderness. But this first fire was a fire of exclusion. It was a blazing boundary that said, "You cannot come back this way." The transition is brutal. From the perfect irrigation of the mist, they are thrust into a world that relies on unpredictable rain. From the effortless abundance of the pristine soil, They are forced to tear their sustenance from ground that fights back with thorns and thistles. From a world of perfect safety, they enter a world where animals are now threats, where the elements are deadly, and where sheer survival will consume their days. The sacred space is closed. The exile has begun. But as we stand outside those gates, looking back at the flaming sword, we must understand the ultimate synthesis of this story. Eden is not just a lost geographic location buried under millennia of sand and shifting tectonic plates. It is a persistent, agonizing memory etched into the very DNA of the human soul. Every time we feel a sense of outrage at injustice, every time we weep over the death of a loved one, every time we look at a beautiful sunset and feel a hollow ache in our chest because the moment cannot last, we are remembering Eden. We are remembering that we were not made for a world of pain, decay, and death. We were made for the garden. We were made for the cool of the day, the longing for that original, uncorrupted home, where the sacred was found in the dirt, the water, and the evening breeze, is the silent, powerful engine driving all of human history. It is what makes us build, what makes us create art, what makes us seek justice. We are a species in exile, carrying the blueprint of paradise in our minds, constantly trying to find our way back to the tree of life. And the profound promise of the biblical narrative is that the story does not end outside the gates. The memory of what was lost in the beginning is the exact same blueprint for what will be restored in the end. The flaming sword will not guard the way forever. The sanctuary will be reopened. And the ultimate hope of humanity is that the exile will end. The garden will envelop the earth, and we will finally, truly be home. But to understand how that return is possible, we have to look at what happened immediately after those gates closed. We have to look at the very first family born outside of paradise, and the first tragic, violent consequences of life in the wilderness. What happened when the first humans tried to worship outside the sanctuary? The answer to that changes everything we know about human nature.